I have wisdom, but I don't have to play the same role that I played when I was in my 20s.
That is the wisdom that actor Jodie Foster found when she entered into her 60s. The kind of professional epiphany that she blames on Mother Nature.
I think it might be a chemical thing that happens to you when you're older, where you just kind of relax.
That's really saying something, since she started her career at the age of 3.
You don't have to worry about me. Just take good care of yourself. And don't catch any cold or anything.
With nearly 100 credits to her name and 2 Oscars, she says she's always had a frustrating on-again, off-again love affair with acting.
Sometimes I go through years where I just don't want to act for a while. I don't find anything. I'll read a perfectly good script about a perfectly good thing that I should be interested in, and I just don't care.
For most of the last decade, Foster was focused on her marriage to Alexandra Hedison and raising her 2 teenage boys. But then, 2 roles came around that have her now back in front of the camera again.
Some people come to Alaska to escape. Get away from something. You don't even think of me!
And she says she's prouder of them than almost anything she's done.
If you die, I want to be the last person you see. Don't die. But if you do, I'll be right there with you.
She's already earned Golden Globe and Critics' Choice nominations for her role in the Netflix original
There's no one more Naiad than you.
Naiad, where she plays Bonnie Stoll, friend and coach to swimmer Diana Naiad, played by Annette Bening.
What were you thinking? Pathetic. Hey, no. Stupid. None of that. Don't beat yourself up, you're doing great. I think it was much more challenging for Annette. I spent a lot of time on the side of the boat sucking in my stomach. That's pretty much what I did. In my jogger bra.
I'm not working with you again, ever.
You think I want to work with you?
I do, actually. Yeah.
Then, after a 5-year wait, there's the highly anticipated 4th season of HBO's True Detective, out next Sunday.
My job is to keep everyone safe.
Night Country is just as spooky and supernatural as the first True Detective, but this time, it's set in the frigid polar winter nights of Alaska.
Was it as cold as it looked out there when you were shooting?
It was probably colder than it looked. There are moments where it's really hard to speak. It's so cold that your mouth kind of talks like that.
Stop around! This is a crime scene! I should pretend like you know what you're doing.
Foster plays Detective Liz Danvers, who's confronting a certain darkness of her own.
Oh, no, you're not gonna blame her on me. And I wasn't even here. You know who was here? You.
I didn't think that I would come back at this level, or I didn't think that I would come back to acting as often as I have now.
Many thought acting was just her destiny. After all, Hollywood has always been home.
Every LA kid loves growing up in LA.
True.
That's their reference.
Did you?
I loved it.
She lived with her mom and 3 siblings, just a mile from what was then a very gritty Walk of Fame.
You were talking about Hollywood Boulevard.
Yeah.
And how
Oh, yeah.
it's very different than it is now.
Yes, we weren't allowed to go there. She said that if she ever found us on Hollywood Boulevard, that we shouldn't come home.
Foster's mom, Brandy Foster, got her into acting, and as her early manager, kept her in it, she says, in a gentle but firm way.
She's asked me about 1,000 times, do you want to be an actress? And I could have always said no, but I don't. It's fine.
He said you were kind of forced into it, I guess isn't really the right word,
Yeah.
but you didn't choose it.
No, I
necessarily.
didn't choose it.
But at some point you chose to keep doing it.
Yes. I knew that that there was sort of an unsaid thing, that, you accept these parameters, or you can always stop. You can always say no.
That was always an option.
It was always an option, but it's a little bit of like, here, you can have this dog food or you can starve. There's a little bit of that.
Despite being the youngest child, there was always a maturity about her, an old soul in a young frame.
And this is me. Born in Mount View Hospital 13 years ago, give or take a month. Female, blonde, natural, of course.
I'm like such an awkward adolescent at Freaky Friday, like lots of pimples and kind of chubby and greasy hair and all that.
Gross. I wish I could switch places with her for just one day.
She proved she could convincingly play characters wise beyond her age. Even her own mother.
Those are kind of my home movies.
What's your name?
Easy.
Well, that's not any kind of name.
It's easy to remember.
Yeah, well, what's your real name?
I don't like my real name.
She was already a veteran actor at the tender age of 12 when she was cast as an underage prostitute in Taxi Driver.
Why do you want me to go back to my parents? I mean, they hate me. Why do you think I split in the first place? There ain't nothing there.
I didn't really understand what building a character was until I did Taxi Driver.
If there was an ambivalence about her career, she says, it was rarely about the work. It was about the celebrity that came with it.
You said that you've said it a bunch of times, actually, I think, that you're an introvert in an extrovert's job. Is that still the case, you think?
Definitely true. Yeah, I'm 100% an introvert. Never been okay with being a public figure. It's not something that's ever felt okay to me or felt healthy.
She was in college at Yale when an obsessed fan, John Hinckley Jr., said he attempted to assassinate Ronald Reagan to get Foster's attention.
Last fall, I received several pieces of unsolicited correspondence signed John W. Hinckley or JWH, and I threw them all away.
She was dragged into history through no fault of her own. Foster then endured years of speculation about her private life, about her sons, about her sexuality, all of which she kept from the tabloids, much to their dismay.
I tried to be as authentic as I possibly could, and I had to protect my own psyche from the publicness. I just had to figure out how to dig a trench around me and to survive intact. And some of that meant being more isolated.
Is that trench still there?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
And the roles she's generally taken, she says, seem to be characters who also have something to work on.
What did you see, Clarice? What did you see?
Lamb. They were screaming.
There's always been an intensity or a vulnerability that have marked so many of her roles.
I thought if I could save just one, but he was so heavy. He was so heavy.
When she played a rape survivor in The Accused, she made us all uncomfortable, and rightly so.
I have not seen The Accused in, I don't know, 25 years. I don't think I wanted to revisit it, actually.
And he pushed me down the pinball machine. And he ripped my shirt. He lifted my skirt. He pulled down my underpants really, really hard.
I can only do one thing at once. I'm not a multitasker. So I'm a focuser, and if you're a focuser, you do get obsessed with things. I think every movie I make, I get obsessed with.
Swim, a no swim, you are forced. You know that.
There's sharks out there.
So, whether she's pretending to be in the Florida Straits or straight out frozen in the Arctic Circle,
Those men died before they froze.
What the?
Get out of here, now!
at 61, Jodie Foster now says she's reached a point of acknowledgement in her life. Yes, she's a little obsessed, and yes, she's an introvert, and yes,
Yes, I am crazy.
but for one of the first times in her long professional life, Jodie Foster is finally feeling a little more free.
I think I have managed to survive and survive intact. And that was no small feat. And look at me. I survived.
I can relate to a whole lot of her movies, and basically the things that she had to go through being forced off into history pertaining to Hinckley. It is a shocking event whenever you all of a sudden step out into the limelight, and it was unintentional, it was not planned, it was not even set out and sketched out with your parents or some of your other family and friends, that whenever you get thrown out into the limelight pertaining to history,
Live tonight on CBS.
it can actually be devastating to the person as well as the persons that surrounds that person's life. And because of what has generated in my life, not just necessarily with the 9 tapes that went to the White House in 1988 during Ronald Reagan's administration, but also in what has recently occurred in my life in 2009 out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Then before that in 2007 up in western Kentucky around Grand Rivers and Benton, pertaining to the Kentucky Dam. And then prior to that, pertaining to the stage of events on a local level that happened right here in Weakley County, Northwest Tennessee. So yes, I can definitely relate to somebody that's been unintentionally put out on the front of the big screen that you really did not choose that. It chose you. Now, granted, I didn't have to pursue my desires and my passions whenever the occurrences took place in my life, not only in 1983, but also in 1988, pertaining to me meeting Satan over here in Martin, Tennessee, on 3 different occasions, him and his 12 disciples. I didn't have to volunteer in being leaded of the Holy Spirit pertaining to the Lord Jesus Christ, in getting out and witnessing and telling people about the love of God, telling people about the Lord Jesus Christ, telling people about mercy, telling people about forgiveness, and also telling people about the end time events that now we're facing more so today than ever before. I didn't have to do those things. I could have been like Jonah. I could have been like other men and women in the Bible. But by doing so, I wouldn't have been fulfilling my purpose in not only satisfying myself, but satisfying my Lord. Because I promise you, if you have a calling in your life, and a lot of people do, in a righteous form, even though I'm not a perfect person, if you do not abide by that calling that the Heavenly Father is calling you into, you will be a regrettable person, and usually miserable. Now, you can cover it up by fame, fortune. You can cover it up by stupidity. You can cover it up by pleading insanity. But the bottom line is this: if you are not obedient to that in which what you have been called in life to do, 9 times out of 10, you are going to regret it. And if you don't regret it in this lifetime, you will regret it in the lifetime to come. So because of that very one entity of basically being at peace with myself, I can lay my head down at night, and I don't have to be a drinker. I don't have to take sleeping pills.
We leave you.
I don't have to resort to other artificial stimulants just to be able to lay my head down at night and sleep comfortable and wake up the next morning in another new day. And I truly believe that a lot of people can't say that about themselves, and that's one of the reasons why that they do what they do, regardless whether they lean towards alcohol or drugs, or lean towards other crutches in their life. It's because they're not fulfilling that in which what God had called them to do, and they know it. Usually they know it. And because of it, their lives are basically miserable. That's what happened to my dad, James Robert Jackson. Whenever he seen what had went on with his wife up in Antioch, Illinois, pertaining to a vision or a, I'd like to call it a visitation. that we got engaged in church affairs up there. And when we first come to Tennessee, we got involved with the Alamo Baptist Church affairs to some degree up until his dad died in 1969. And then from 1969, my mom and dad decided that they wasn't going to no longer pursue the church world. And man, did that open up a brand new, horrifying events that happened in our lives. And whenever I say our lives, I'm not just talking about my life. I'm talking about even my mother. She suffered because of it. My two older brothers, my younger brother, they suffered on account of it. And most of all, my dad, James Robert Jackson, suffered on account of it because of the way that the community basically was frightened of him. They were scared of him. And it basically created such of a division with the community versus us being a part of that community that it was absolutely terrifying, traumatizing. And of course, I've went through so many close encounters of death again and again and again that in and of itself is traumatizing to the body and the mind. And if you'll add that on top of all the other events towards being thrown out into the eyes of history, not just with the 9 tapes, but all the other events, regardless whether it was the Tennessee events, the Kentucky events, the Oklahoma events, and even the Atlanta, Georgia events that has been documented in their databases that nobody can deny. That's now a part of my testimony that I can relate to Jody in some of the things that they talk about pertaining to her life. I personally think that she's made a heck of a career for herself. Does that mean that she's the best actor? It means that I favor to her probably more so than any other actor out there, being grown up in the culture of America, because I can relate to the same things basically that she can relate to pertaining to the assassination or the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan pertaining to Hinckley. My life has basically been stemmed around Homeland Security, Secret Service, especially whenever I went out west and done what I done out there. Then I got on a lot of different radar screens. It wasn't just Homeland Security, Secret Service radar screen that I was on. Then I got on a lot of people's radar screens, and that's what caused that much more misery into my life, especially whenever I come back to Tennessee in 2014, and basically teetotal absolute hell busted loose in not only my life, but my brother's life too as well. That's basically, to sum it up in a nutshell, in what I'm talking about.
We leave you this Sunday among the white-tailed deer of Erie County in New York State.
You see the atmosphere of all that, basically nature playing its own course in the middle of downpouring rain like that. I couldn't tell you how many times growing up as a young lad, we would load up at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning and be up at Sammy's bait shop on the other side of Dresden, drinking coffee and getting ready with the rest of the hunters towards going out into the woods and basically just enjoy nature. I could not tell you the amount of times that I have been in that same setting watching deer. No, I don't think that I've ever been up close and seen them brushing up, 2 bucks brushing up with one another like that. But I've been in the same setting, having a rain jacket on and usually coveralls to stay warm and dry with. I've actually taken plastic and covered over my shotgun to keep it from getting so wet. That way I wouldn't have to go through such of a harsh cleaning whenever I got it back home. but I couldn't tell you the amount of times that I've been engaged in nature, just like you're seeing right now. That was probably some of the most enjoyable times in my entire life.
I'm Jane Paul.
That's a whole lot better than listening to the traffic and all the other gizmos and gadgets that goes along with it, and horns blowing and all etc. Please, let's watch this.
And our CBS News polling shows that many Americans.
This is Miss Margaret. Year 2024. Here in America.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. Yesterday marked the 3rd anniversary of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And our CBS News polling shows that many Americans in each party are uneasy about the prospects of a peaceful transfer of power in future elections, with half the country expecting there will be violence from the side that loses. Our polling also shows that 3 in 4 Americans see the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border as either a crisis or a very serious situation. That 45% is a notable increase. Both of those issues, democracy and immigration, are dominating the campaign trail as we head into the last week before the first votes in the 2024 election are taken in Iowa. But first, we traveled to Eagle Pass, Texas last week and caught up with House Speaker Mike Johnson, who led a delegation of 64 Republican members of Congress to the Texas-Mexico border on a fact-finding tour.
We have a humanitarian.
I want you to listen to this. It's dealing with hostiles, okay? And it's not just necessarily bad people coming over here illegally, but basically a government that is out of control and out of touch with reality in not addressing the issues that concerns its own people. I have never seen a government this far out in left field, to the point that I don't know if it feels like that it can't, or if it just don't want to. It's sure giving out the bad signals whenever it comes to protecting the American people.
Catastrophe here, and of course huge national security concerns. What we saw is in some ways difficult to describe, just the magnitude of the chaos here, the number of lives that are adversely affected, the minor children that are being trafficked into the country, and the fentanyl overdoses and poisoning that has been a scourge on the country. And these are transnational dangerous criminal organizations. And the maddening thing about it is that the White House is allowing all this. These are policy choices that created this chaos. And it is thus policy choices that could change it. And
which
that's
policy
what we're
choices do you think need to be changed?
On his first day in office, President Biden came in and issued executive orders that began this chaos. Remain in Mexico is one of them. The catch and release program has created part of this problem. You could end catch and release.
But you need the logistical and financial support to be able to do that. Congress has the purse strings to give them the money to do that.
That's true, but I'll quote to you the deputy chief of the U.S. Border Patrol. He said, "It is as if we're trying to administer an open fire hydrant." He said, "I don't need more buckets. I need the flow to be turned off. And the way you do that is with policy changes." We're just asking the White House to apply common sense, and they seem to be completely uninterested in doing so.
So we toured the Firefly facility, that tented facility. You all went on the same tour. And what we were told is there is a need for consequences, Border Patrol officials say. But they also need the money. They need the resources to be able to process. They said they didn't have enough men They didn't have enough logistical support to even deport people when they wanted to do that. So
Right.
can you look them in the eye when you talk to them and say, I'm going to get you the money that you need? Because that is part of the challenge.
We did look in the eye, many of these, I mean, from the top officials to the rank and file, and they all say the same thing. Please stop the flow.
Are you saying you wouldn't authorize new funding to help out those agents with what they say they need unless it is matched with these bigger policy changes?
Right. I think anyone with common sense would tell you that you cannot throw more money at a bad system. We don't want to empower more of this. The White House, the administration, Secretary Mayorkas have put a welcome mat out.
But you couldn't even go through with the deportations that you would like to see happen without the funding to actually have the process function. I mean,
well,
ICE has the capacity to hold 40,000 beds. That's not nearly matching what you're describing.
In a triage situation, you have to stop the flow first before you can commence with the surgery. And we're hemorrhaging here, and everyone knows it.
These are very, very real and immediate issues. It is a crisis.
Absolutely.
So don't you need the help of the Homeland Security Secretary instead of trying to impeach him?
We've been asking Secretary Mayorkas since he took office to enforce the law, to do his job, and he's done exactly the opposite. He's testified untruthfully
but why
before Congress
focus the congressional resources on going ahead with an impeachment when they could be dealing with the actual issues here on the ground?
I believe Secretary Mayorkas is an abject failure, but it's not because of incompetence. I believe he has done this intentionally. I think these are intentional policy decisions that he's made, and I think there must be accountability for that.
You're going to impeach the guy you need to negotiate with.
Secretary Mayorkas is not a good faith negotiating partner. He is unwilling to enforce existing federal law. Why would we believe that he would do any new provision? He's lied to Congress repeatedly. He's lied to me personally under oath. He stood in front of my committee on multiple occasions and insisted that the border is closed and secure when everyone in America knows it's not true.
So the senators who are negotiating with the White House right now have not shared the text of what they're putting together with you. Is that accurate?
Right.
So one of the main Republican negotiators, Lindsey Graham, was with us on Sunday, and he said there were three things that would help get a deal to pass the House: asylum reform, limitations on parole, and re-invoking expulsion authority. Those things are being negotiated. So what more do you need?
Well, you've heard us say repeatedly, insisting upon the provisions of H.R. 2, which is our legislation that we passed more than 7 months ago. Provisions of H.R. 2 include reforming that broken parole system, reforming the broken asylum process.
But it's got no future in the Senate. Even Republican senators like James Lankford and Lindsey Graham say they don't want it. Biden's going to veto it.
Well,
so it's dead on arrival.
I don't know if you can speak for all the senators. There's a lot who understand why those provisions are important. And the reason is, if you only reform one of those 5 provisions, if you don't end catch and release as a policy, if you don't reinstitute remain in Mexico, if you only fix asylum or parole and not these other things, then you don't solve the problem. You don't stem the flow here. And again, that's the #1 objective, so that we can get a handle on this crisis.
Do you believe that more border funding is needed? Because the White House says they want to hire more agents, they want to do all sorts of things, and you are standing in the way in the House.
That's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. They have to solve the crisis here, and throwing more money at the broken system will not do that. All it will.
But you're not opposing funding, and that's what I'm trying to clarify.
No, but we understand that Border Patrol needs the necessary resources to do its job, but they can't do the job that they're hired to do unless you change the policy here.
But you would potentially be open to what the Senate is negotiating and put it on the floor in the House?
It's a hypothetical question. Again, they've not sent me any of these provisions, but I've told them what we expect. Well, of course we want to deal. We want to solve this crisis. We have to. We have a moral obligation to do so.
Look, you at the end of this month are going to have a majority of just 219 Republicans. You need 218 to govern. Have you talked to the Democratic leader about what it would take to get a bill through? Have you talked to the White House?
No, Hakeem Jeffries and I are colleagues and friends and have a good relationship with him. I'm not deterred by this at all. I'm undaunted by this. We deal with the numbers that we have. It will be one of the smallest majorities in the history of the Congress, clearly.
Doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room.
It doesn't, but we do have, I think, a lot of unity on the big important issues that we're really focused on. And I'm confident that we'll get the job done and be able to demonstrate that we can govern well. And I think that's one of the reasons that we'll expand this majority in the next election cycle. I'm very optimistic about that.
Well, first you got to keep the government open. January 19th.
We do, and we've been negotiating in good faith all through the holidays, every day over the holidays, except for Christmas, on the top line numbers. And I think that we may be close to a deal, but we have insisted that federal spending must be addressed in a very serious and sober manner. We crossed an important threshold this week, $34 trillion in federal debt. There's never been anything of that magnitude in the history of the country, and it's not sustainable. The Congress has a responsibility. We have the power of the purse, of course, and we have to be good stewards of precious taxpayer resources. We cannot continue to borrow money to spend it. And so reducing non-defense discretionary spending must be a priority of Congress, and we're trying to insist upon that in these negotiations.
When President Trump says immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country, is that a statement you agree with?
That's not language I would use, but I understand the urgency of President Trump's admonition. He's been saying this since he ran for president the first time, that we have to secure the border. And I think the vast majority of the American people understand the necessity of that, and I think they agree with his position.
But that statement goes beyond what you are personally comfortable with.
It's not language I would use, but I understand.
Because it sounds hateful.
Well, it's not hateful. What President Trump is trying to advance is his America First priority, and I think that makes sense to a lot of people. The current president, President Biden, wants additional supplemental spending on national security, but he denies the most important point of our own national security, and that is our own border. And so,
but you can say that without talking about blood.
President Biden's position is frustrating to us. It's frustrating to the American people, and certainly to President Trump. And I think that's what he's articulating there.
The White House declined our invitation to have Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas join us today, but we will continue to ask for him. According to administration officials and sources familiar with the negotiations in the Senate, a deal to surge resources to the border and make significant policy changes is expected this week. Details are being finalized. More of our interview with Speaker Johnson and former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney when we come back.
All right, let's go on here.
To a border security package, including Johnson, who told us he believes Russia's Vladimir Putin must be defeated, but that the U.S. must, quote, secure the U.S. border before we secure anyone else's. We asked the Speaker if the two aid packages could be passed by February. Speaker Johnson says President Zelensky personally told him that was the date by which he needs the U.S. funding.
I think if the White House and the Senate are serious about this and they listen to the American people, remembering this is an 80% issue with the American people, they understand the necessity of what we're talking about. We have to insist upon securing our own country. And also if we get the necessary information and the necessary answers with regard to what is the end game in Ukraine and how will we be responsible with the expenditure of those resources. The White House has not given us the necessary information.
Have you spoken with President Biden recently or Donald Trump recently?
Yes, both. I mean, yes, I've spoken to President Trump very recently and President Biden, before the holidays. Yeah.
Do you take counsel from the former president, or what are those conversations like?
Well, very friendly. I mean, I've known the president well. I think he will be the nominee, and I think he's going to win the election and be the next president of the United States. So it's important to maintain that relationship. It'll be an important one for the country.
Back in 2021, you were the lawmaker who circulated the legal brief known as the Texas Amicus Brief, challenging the 2020 election outcome in a number of states, which by CBS editorial standards makes you an election denier.
That's nonsense.
Well, can I get you on the record on that?
I've always been consistent on the record. Did you read the brief? Did you get a chance to read what we filed with the Supreme Court?
Well, I have read extensively some criticisms of that.
You read commentary about the brief, but not what we submitted to the court.
But you recognize that President Biden won the 2020 election? Can you just put
President
that aside
Biden
as an
was
issue?
certified as the winner of the election. He took the oath of office. He's been the president for 3 years. The argument that we presented to the court, which is our only avenue to do so, was that the Constitution was clearly violated in the 2020 election. It's Article 2, Section 1, and anyone can Google it and read it for themselves. The system by which you choose electors to elect the president of the United States must be done by the individual states, and the system must be ratified by the state legislatures. That is language, plain language out of the Constitution.
Have issues with the validity of the 2020 election.
The Constitution was violated in the run-up to the 2020 election. Not always in bad faith, but in the aftermath of COVID, many states changed their election laws in ways that violated that plain language. That's just a fact. We presented that argument and those facts to the court, and it was never directly addressed because of the Texas litigation. But that was the only vehicle we had to present that issue squarely to the court.
It was completely shut down as an issue. But your colleague Liz Cheney, your former colleague, wrote, Mike Johnson and our Republican leaders have played a destructive role. You, she says, convinced 125 other Republican members of Congress to sign on to an amicus brief that many never read, that made numerous false, factual, and constitutional claims. How do you respond to that and the impression that you might have contributed in some way?
No, I don't spend much time responding to Liz Cheney's criticism these days. Liz Cheney worked with the Democrats on the January 6th Select Committee to make all of this even more politicized than it was. She was a close friend and colleague before
she said
made those choices. Yeah.
Which is why she was surprised, she said.
Well, I'm surprised that she's giving that criticism, because during that process, Liz and I were in constant dialogue about that, and at one point, she even considered signing on to that bill. I'll tell you that is a fact, to that amicus brief. And we talked about that at great length, and we had a difference of opinion on the law, and people can agree to disagree on that, but I'm telling you that the plain language of the Constitution has never changed, and what happened in many states by changing the election laws without ratification by the state legislatures is a violation of the Constitution. That's a plain fact that no one can dispute.
How do you make sense of the idea that you still have issues with the validity of the 2020 election, but you have to negotiate and talk with the President of the United States, Joe Biden?
This is water under the bridge. I mean, when the Supreme Court passed on the Texas litigation and did not address the issue, I believe in the rule of law. This is our system. We move forward. I work with President Biden as the President of the United States. I think that he will be a one-term president, but this discussion about what happened in 2020 is yesterday's news.
Well, I want to ask you, though, because a majority of House Republicans voted to authorize an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden recently. What do you think he should be impeached for, and how do you negotiate with him in the process of that impeachment?
The House has
potential impeachment.
Among the very heavy responsibilities that the House of Representatives holds, next to the declaration of war, impeachment is probably the heaviest power that we have. In the previous administration, we were very critical of the House Democrats because they politicized impeachment. That is not the way that we should handle that heavy power of the House. We do have a responsibility, however, to investigate things that are untoward, and this has happened with the Biden administration, very methodically, very carefully, in a way that is exactly the opposite of what the House Democrats did during the Trump administration. And now the investigation is being impeded. The White House has suddenly refused to turn over documents that have been requested and certain witnesses that are key to unwinding exactly what happened. So it came to a certain point that the House had to pass the impeachment inquiry as a measure, because that puts us at the apex of our constitutional authority, because we'll have to enforce these subpoenas in a court of law. That was a necessary step that we had to take. So again, it's still not been prejudged. We've not made a determination that impeachment is going to happen here.
So you haven't made the conclusion that you've seen evidence that we'll move forward with this?
Well, no, you can't prejudge an impeachment inquiry or investigation. I think that would be a violation of our duty under the Constitution. You have to investigate and involve the truth where it leads. There is a lot of smoke here, and Congress has a responsibility to find the fire if it exists, and that's what they're doing right now, very carefully.
Our full interview with Speaker Johnson is available on our YouTube channel. We turn now to former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Her book is Oath and Honor, a memoir and a warning. Good morning to you here.
Good morning, Margaret. Great to be with you.
I want to give you a chance to respond to the speaker. Is it a fact, as he asserted, that when you were in House leadership, you considered signing on to that challenge to Donald Trump?
It is not. We were, as Mike said, in constant contact throughout that period. I actually know precisely when he sent me the brief and precisely when, less than 30 minutes later, I told him my concerns with the brief. Mike knows that as well. The brief itself was legally and constitutionally infirm. I made that clear. Mike's claims that somehow, and this is very dangerous, that somehow, as a member of Congress, he has the right to reject, ignore the rulings of the courts. You know, we have dozens of state and federal courts that assessed the claims, assessed the constitutionality, and rejected them. And Mike's position, which people really need to think about because it's so chilling, is that somehow as a member of Congress, he has the right to ignore the rulings of those courts, to assert, absent any finding of fact, that somehow he feels that something that happened was unconstitutional, and therefore that he can throw out the votes of millions of Americans. That's tyranny. It's not the rule of law, it's tyranny. And it's important for people to understand that, because this notion of rejecting, ignoring, refusing to abide by the rulings of the courts is also what we will see in a second Trump term if Donald Trump is reelected.
And you write extensively about this in your book, and you say it was actually Donald Trump's own lawyers who wrote that legal brief that Speaker Johnson circulated.
Correct. And the other thing is, Johnson, and I made this clear to him too, the very first time we spoke after I reviewed the brief, that he was misrepresenting the brief to the members of the conference. I also told him that I thought that signing on to this brief for anyone who was a member of a bar raised significant and serious ethical issues, because you were asserting to a court facts that not only were untrue, but which had already been rejected by other courts and for which you had no basis, no knowledge. So he knows the truth, but the American people, beyond the disagreement between Johnson and I, need to recognize how dangerous it is to have elected officials who think they can ignore the rulings of the courts.
And so for those folks who say, oh, this sounds very complicated, one of the reasons we're talking about this is because the members of the House Republican leadership signed on to it. All of the members of the House Republican leadership supported Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election and currently are endorsing him to be the next president of the United States.
Right.
So from your perspective, it sounds like you're saying you don't trust Republican leadership in the House and their conduct in the upcoming election.
Look, you've had two members of Republican leadership in the House on television this morning. You've had Mike on, again, claiming that he has the right individually to decide that he's going to throw out millions of votes and ignore the rulings of the courts. You've had Elise Stefanik on this morning talking about the J6 hostages. I mean, you don't have to take my word for the fact that you can't count on these elected Republicans to defend the Constitution. Every time they go out and give an interview, they demonstrate it themselves.
Now, Elise Stefanik was on another network this morning. You just mentioned her. The quote was, "I have concerns about the treatment of the January 6th hostages." Hostages is a very specific word, and there are well over 1,200 people in the U.S. legal system going through legal proceedings right now for their role in the attack that day. That word she used is exactly the word that Donald Trump uses.
And that's why she's using it. And it's outrageous and it's disgusting. And if you go and you look at what individuals have been convicted for who are incarcerated, you'll find, extensively, these are people who were involved in violence against police officers, in the assault on the Capitol. And it's disgraceful for Donald Trump to be saying what he's saying, and then for those who are attempting to enable him or attempting to further their own political careers to repeat it. It's a disgrace. And you cannot say that you are a member of a party that believes in the rule of law. You can't say that you're pro-law enforcement if you then go out and you say these people are, quote, hostages. It's disgraceful.
We have other Republican candidates for president, like Ron DeSantis, who have said they are open to reviewing the cases against these defendants and considering pardons for them.
Look, the president has pardon power and pardon authority. I think that it's a very important piece that people ought to consider when they're thinking about for whom they're going to vote. Someone who says that they would pardon individuals who assaulted the Capitol, who attempted to stop a constitutional process, who assaulted police officers. I mean, it was a bloody battle. I had police officers, one tell me that it was like medieval hand-to-hand combat. The notion that the Republican Party would continue its efforts to whitewash that day, when the peaceful transition of power is at the core of the survival of our republic, tells you that they're unfit for office.
We have to take a break, but I want to come back with you on the other side of it. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
It's counterproductive is what it is. But at the same time, you have to look at the bigger picture towards looking at all sides. What has caused this great nation to be $34 trillion in debt, and all these illegals coming over here that we know absolutely nothing of pertaining to their background? What has caused all the fentanyl? What has caused all the major calamities pertaining to the forces of nature that is now bombarding not only the American continental United States, but bombarding all over the world pertaining to natural catastrophes that are only increasing, not decreasing, but increasing in intensity as well as volume per se of what they're doing. What has caused all the gun violence over here in America? What has caused all this? So whenever you look at one embarrassing situation, you got to look at all the embarrassing situations that what would have motivated a group of people enough that they was willing to put their necks out on the line and going up there and doing what they done January the 6th. Do I agree with what they done? No, not necessarily, but at the same time, you got to realize the trajectory we're on of $34 trillion and we're only worth a little over $100 trillion. It's not going to take long because these catastrophes continue to keep happening more so and etc. Real estate keeps going up, so the price of this indebtedness is going to continue to go. I mean, they claim that we're basically spending $5 trillion in the White House, but we're only retracting about 3 of that. And so many areas now are being violated, including our roads, our bridges. The people are very dissatisfied. And because the people are dissatisfied, they are responding according to our Constitution that, yes, there is a clause that says if our government is no longer participating in taking care of its people, then the Insurrection Act comes into play. I personally hate to see that any type of insurrection in any country would come to play, especially a democratic country. But whenever you have a country that's supposed to be a superpower, such as America, and we wasn't smart enough to foresee all the unforeseeables that's coming over the horizon, regardless whether it be with Ukraine, regardless whether it be over in the Middle East, because the Bible is full of predictions towards what's going to happen over in the Middle East. Whenever you have a group of people that is this far out in the left field, maybe it is time to drain the swamp and go in and remove all of them and come in with a brand new system. Because I personally am ashamed of various people that has done various things within my lifetime pertaining to the United States government that has brought this upon to not only the guilty but also the innocent. It's absolutely appalling to see how things has unleashed the way that they have, especially since basically 1983, not only environmentally, but in every other aspect that you can think of. In every other aspect that you can think of. America is no longer a safe country. America is no longer a safe country. And you used to say, well, it's never been a safe country pertaining to making investments. Well, in that perspective, you may be correct. But whenever it comes to the point that whenever you put your children on a school bus to go to school, if you not know for sure if they're going to ever return back because of some mass murder going on. I mean, I was reading a while ago, there's already been 2 or 3 mass murders, or probably even more now. And one of them was in a school this year, 2024. So we're already starting out on a bad foot whenever it comes to safety. They had a door or something blow out of an airline just within a past day or two that, thank God, it didn't suck nobody out. But life in general is a balance of prosperity and safety. Prosperity and safety. Well, whenever you take either or out of the perspective, then you have chaos. And that's what the American people are seeing that's occurring. And that's what the American people are seeing that's going to continue to occur, and probably even become more aggressive pertaining to the hostiles. You got a world right now full of hostiles. It ain't just the illegals coming over the border. It ain't just the gun violence here in America, but it's all over. Hostility has risen significantly on the planet since Ronald Reagan done what Ronald Reagan done in the late 80s. During the late 80s, everybody was freaked out, not knowing if the superpowers was basically going to destroy us all. They didn't know if Russia was going to push the buttons first, or if America was going to push the buttons first and going to basically create a onslaught of a nuclear holocaust, a nuclear war. Well, ever since the big guys kind of got settled down a little bit, now all these little guys have stepped up to the plate. Terrorism has been on the rise. It's still on the rise. The Middle East now has basically just been caught on fire. Nothing but a tinderbox now that is only escalating. I mean, just because they take it off the American news does not mean that it went away. Just because that the American media is not focused on what's going on in Russia and Ukraine does not mean that it has gone away. It just means that they have gotten tired publishing the same thing again and again and again because they feel like that the American people has gotten tired of it. We got to look at the facts, and to take something and throw it under the rug, out of sight, out of mind, that may work for a certain extent of time on certain issues, but whenever it comes to the issue of survival, and that's where we're heading right now with the issue of survival, then it's time for everybody to pay attention towards what's going on, and instead of being part of the problem, let's be part of the solution to the problem. So it does pay to keep your eye on the ball. It does pay to listen to the news. It does pay to be able to understand what's going on the other side of the ridge or the other side of the mountain or the other in another country somewhere, even though it may be 3, 4, 5, 6, 10,000 miles away. It does pay because today everybody is interly connected in some form or fashion, and I guarantee you, if something horrible happens in one continent, eventually it will affect all the others. I thought we was fixing to start the program here. Sorry about that. Now we are. Here we go.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. We return to our conversation with former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. The Supreme Court is going to take on that Colorado case where the state was going to remove him from the ballot, citing insurrection and the 14th.
Now, if you'll put your thinking cap on, go back just about 20 minutes ago into the same digital recording here, whenever she was basically interviewing the Speaker of the House down on the border, and some of the things that he talked about that once more put wild ideals into people's heads that the election was not a legitimate election because of COVID, that certain states had basically let their guard down, I guess would be the proper wording. In other words, their standards wasn't near as tight, wasn't near as high as what they was before COVID. That's kind of pretty bad whenever you have people within the system that once more is basically being a rebel riser. We've known Donald Trump was a rebel riser from the get-go. We know Donald Trump was not one of the party pertaining to the politicians that basically throw the ball from one another, playing both sides against the middle. Donald Trump does have a legitimate reason in kicking up this much sand pertaining to how the affairs of the American government has been run for the past 30 plus years. Now, do I agree with everything that Donald Trump does? No. Do I agree with what they attempted to do on January the 6th? No, not in that format. No, I do not. But at the same time, you got to look at the trajectory of everything. And if we are heading towards a bankruptcy country, if we are heading towards basically great tribulation that the Bible talks about, maybe it is time to try to intervene and stop these things from occurring, especially if they're only going from being bad to worse.
Amendment. The special counsel, Jack Smith, charged Donald Trump with a number of things. Insurrection was not one of them. So given that it doesn't meet that Justice Department standard, do you think the Supreme Court will ultimately disqualify Trump?
So you have to ask yourself a question. Why didn't he charge Mr. Trump with insurrection?
Insurrection. I certainly believe that Donald Trump's behavior rose to that level. I believe that he ought to be disqualified from holding office in the future. It's working its way through the courts. And in the meantime, and in any case, we have to be prepared to ensure that we can defeat him at the ballot box, which ultimately I believe we'll be able to do.
The Supreme Court may ultimately hear it, but right now the D.C. Circuit will be taking on this question of presidential immunity from criminal prosecution this Tuesday. Lindsey Graham was on this program, the senator, last Sunday, saying no one's immune from prosecution, but presidents do have immunity in order to do their job. And he said Trump just gave a fiery speech. As a conservative, what do you make of this and the broader argument that this would be undermining presidential immunity?
Look, I think that there's no basis for an assertion that a president of the United States is completely immune from criminal prosecution for acts in office. And I suspect that that's what the court will hold. I think it's really important for people as they're looking at all of this litigation to recognize what Donald Trump's trying to do. He's trying to suppress the evidence. He's trying to delay his trial because he doesn't want people to see the witnesses who'll testify against him. And we just saw again this morning news reports that Dan Scavino, Pat Cipollone, testimony that they have apparently given in front of the grand jury that once again confirms what we were able to discover in the select committee, confirms that Donald Trump did not want to tell people to go home, did not want to tell the mob to leave the Capitol, that he watched the attack on television. And Trump knows that the witnesses in his trial are not his political opponents. He knows that they're going to be the people who are closest to him, the people that he appointed, and he doesn't want the American people to see that evidence before they vote. They have a right to see that evidence before they vote. And so I think it's very important he not be able to delay his trial.
Very quickly, what do you think of the fact that Secretary Austin has been hospitalized since January 1st and didn't tell the White House until days later?
I think they've got some very serious explaining to do. I think that there's a real difference between public transparency and alerting the commander-in-chief to the fact that the Secretary of Defense is in the hospital. Apparently the Deputy Secretary was on vacation in Puerto Rico. I think it's inexplicable. We need to know more about exactly what happened there, but that's not the way the Pentagon ought to be conducting business.
Still be asking questions about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Liz Cheney, thank you for being here. The very first votes of 2024 will happen next Monday in the Iowa caucus. Our Ed O'Keefe is there.
Just over a week to go, and Donald Trump remains confident.
Because I always say, how the hell do I lose Iowa? I got the farmers of this country, $28 billion. How the hell do I?
The former president is running a far more formidable operation than the first time he ran in the First in the Nation caucus.
Calling from the Trump team?
And Iowa is like the rest of the country, increasingly concerned about the crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border.
What's the sort of number two issue you're worried about?
Close the border.
Immigration.
Immigration? The border for sure.
With more migrants being sent north and west to big cities, most Americans now oppose providing temporary housing and social services in the areas where they live.
All these millions of people that have nowhere to live and that our system cannot support, we are not helping these people.
Another hot topic in Iowa, January 6th. 2/3 of Republicans nationally support Trump's calls to pardon those who forced their way into the Capitol.
Some people call them prisoners. I call them hostages. Release the J6 hostages, Joe.
Trump's assault on democracy isn't just part of his past. It's what he's promising for the future.
How Trump responded to January 6th and broader concerns about American democracy are now leading themes of President Biden's re-election campaign.
They were there with love in their heart. That was an unbelievable, and it was a beautiful day. It was a beautiful day.
But while Trump may be leading here in Iowa, that isn't stopping GOP opponents Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, both running hard for second place.
That was Ed O'Keefe reporting in Iowa. We go now to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who joins us from Des Moines, Iowa. Good morning to you, Governor.
Good morning. I don't even want to hear this. Let's go on. It's sickening in how the adversity is happening between both parties, and the fact of the matter is both parties are guilty in putting us where we are here today. Now, you can continue to do the same old, just like a dog returning back to its vomit, or you can change your trajectory and try to go at this in a different perspective, because obviously these are the people that has helped to put this great nation in the shape that it's in right now.
Jordan. Senator, what is the choke point? Why isn't aid making it into Gaza?
Well, Margaret, Senator Merkley and I went to the Rafah crossing to find out exactly that question. There are two big things that are happening. One is the unnecessarily cumbersome process going through the Israeli screening process, which I believe is the result of political decisions by the Netanyahu coalition. For example, many items that should be allowed to go into Gaza, water sort of filtration systems, other systems like that, were in a warehouse of rejected items that we visited. While we were there, we saw a truck turned away that had a big box from UNICEF, which is, of course, the UN organization that helps children. It was a unit to help with water desalinization. It was rejected. And when one item on a truck is rejected, the entire truck is rejected. The other big issue is within Gaza, the so-called deconfliction process, which is just a fancy name for those who are providing humanitarian assistance to have the confidence that they can deliver it without being killed. And according to all the international NGOs that we talked about who've been operating in conflict zones around the world, they've never seen a worse process for assuring the safe delivery of humanitarian assistance. And so that, of course, makes it very difficult to get the help to people who need it, people who are starving and where they're on the verge of outbreak of cholera and other diseases.
France and Jordan made the decision to airdrop aid in because of those issues going in by land. Should the United States do the same?
Well, I think we should consider every means to try to get desperately needed humanitarian assistance in to Gaza. The problem with airdrops is it's just not at scale. In other words, it's good, but what we need is far more trucks to be able to cross into Gaza. After all, before the war started, you had 500 trucks crossing into Gaza. And today, you know, this last week, it was around 150 trucks per day. We need to make this a 24/7 operation. The Israeli screening sites are only operating on like an 8-hour-a-day schedule, taking some days off. This is a 24/7 humanitarian crisis, and we need a system that will recognize that people are dying every day. Of course, some from bombs. We have over 22 people dead, 2/3 of them women and children, but also this humanitarian crisis.
You said you believe aid's not getting in because of a political decision by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. If that's the case, does that government need to face consequences from the United States, their ally?
Yes, I do think there have to be consequences, and Secretary Blinken and President Biden have been right to insist on two things: a reduction in the unacceptable levels of civilian casualties, and much more cooperation when it comes to providing humanitarian assistance. We've not seen that. This is one reason why I and other senators have proposed an amendment that would apply to every country that the United States provides military assistance to, whether it's Ukraine, Israel, or any other country, that would require that country to cooperate fully with the United States in providing humanitarian assistance in an area of conflict where U.S. provided weapons are being used. It would also require all recipients of U.S. military assistance to abide by international humanitarian law. These are some basic principles that should be universally applied by the United States.
The White House so far has not signed on to that. Before I let you go, sir, I want to ask you, since you're coming back to Washington to work, 63% of Americans, according to our polling, believe Joe Biden needs to get tougher at the U.S. border. I'm wondering if you are comfortable with provisions that would tighten asylum law and give more expulsion authority to turn away migrants coming to the United States.
Well, Margaret, President Biden is well aware of the unacceptable challenges that we're facing right now at the U.S. border, which is why he provided a large number of proposed additional resources for Border Patrol agents. As you know, there's a bipartisan group of senators that are discussing various policy changes. I'm looking forward to hearing the results of those discussions. I'm told that both the Democratic Senate caucus and the Republican Senate caucus may be briefed as early as this week on a framework, although I don't know for sure. I'm going to have to look at every proposal before I make any final decision. I can tell you that some of the House proposals are way too extreme and undermine
Senator, I'm
the
sorry,
idea of America.
because of the delay, I'm going to have to speak over you and cut you off because of this commercial break. I apologize, sir. We'll be back in a moment.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
We don't need talk. We need action. And if we don't get action, the trajectory we're on right now is only going to bring that much more misery and sorrow into our children's lives and our children's lives that I personally do not want to be a part of. That's the reason why, if there's not a predominant third party coming into play of an independent, I will refuse to participate in another presidential election. There hasn't been but 2 presidential elections that I have participated in. One of them was with Al Gore, and the other one was with Bill Clinton. And by me saying that, you may be saying, well, that means you're a Democrat. No, it don't mean I'm a Democrat. It means that at the time, whenever those men was running, I felt like that their ideals, that their visionary visions was the best thing for America. Whenever I look at the parties today and what kind of mess that they have made, it automatically throws a red flag in disqualification of both of them, both parties. And to add insult to misery, they want to disqualify Donald Trump, saying that he's ineligible because of what went on January the 6th. I don't know if that be the so or not, pertaining to the insurrection laws in a lot of these ballots. And if it is, then so be it. But the bottom line is this: they have all of them that claim that they were smarter than us because they went to college and they got a degree and they had this and that and they had a PhD and all these other things. Well, we can see now where the smart people, the educated people, has gotten us. Now, does that mean that I stand for people being non-educated? No. It just means that their education that they was given obviously must have supported more greed for themselves than it was need for all the rest of us. That's what it means. And the ideal of thinking, well, if I go to college, I got a better future. Do you? Really? I mean, I know people that working in Walmart right now that ought to be working for NASA. I know people right now that's got enough degrees hanging on their wall, but they're flipping burgers for McDonald's. Is the answer more education? You know, I tend to wonder that's the reason why that our government has allowed for all the illegals to come over here, is because they know that the majority of the people are either feeble, weak, are just lazy, one or the other, to the degree that now we don't have construction workers, we don't have welders, we don't have plumbers, we don't have people that's involved in thousands of different needs here in America, from A to Z, all the way down to somebody washing the windows on a high rise. They, whenever I say they, I'm talking about the smart people, the educated people, have let us down. Now, whenever I first come into the state of Tennessee in 1966, I was about 6 or 7 years old at that time. And by and large, most people around in this particular area at that time could not speak with their pronunciations properly, and a great deal of them couldn't even write. A lot of your farming people at that time basically would sign a check with an X, and the bank would identify that this X was a certain X that belonged to so-and-so down the road here. My great-grandfather was fortunate enough, I don't know what his surrounding circumstances was whenever he was a child growing up. I wish I did. But he was educated enough that he could not only read and write, but he could also read pharmaceutical prescriptions, and that was one of the reasons why that he was allotted towards being able to sell medication across the counter. Way before Big Brother ever got their paws in controlling that industry, pertaining to it now having to be a legalized pharmaceutical organization that people's got to have all this college just to be able to handle these pills. I think part of that was a good thing because it helped to eliminate the snake poison that the people was selling, telling them that it was medication, and the whole time it wasn't nothing but sugar-coated water. I think that anything that's not controlled properly will be run improperly. That's what I think, regardless whether it's selling pills, making moonshine, and turning into a legalized industry towards making legal liquor and packaging it up and doing it properly. That way for the safety and the benefit of the people. That way they're not going blind like it was during the moonshine era. I think anything needs to be regulated. And that's one of the things that has gotten America in trouble, is that there's been too much regulations in some areas and not enough regulation in others. And somehow or another, we here in America cannot hit a happy medium. And because of it, we've got both parties now fighting against each other. And you know who winds up falling through the cracks? The unfortunate. The unfortunate. And it used to be that we could pronounce the unfortunate towards the uneducated. But now it's not that way. Now you can have all kinds of education. Remembering and memorizing this and memorizing that. You can do all kinds of equations. You can basically work for NASA. Or basically build a nuclear bomb in splitting the atom. But those same people that's got all that education are drawing unemployment and looking for employment in other areas other than the qualifications that they're qualified for. So education, throw that out the door anymore towards the unfortunate. Now it's turned into a buddy-buddy system on almost every level. And if you do have lots of education and you are willing to move and migrate somewhere else, and if a frog had wings, he wouldn't have to worry about bumping his tail every time he jumped. But if you are caught up into the right circuit on this buddy-buddy system deal, well, we may hire this person. This is a keeper. But it's based upon favoritism, and it's based upon whether or not they like you or not. And if they don't like you, they'll just push you off to the side. Now, they can tell you that prejudicism does not live in America, and I guarantee you, probably America is one of the most prejudiced countries. I mean, it used to be that if you was wearing glasses, I remember whenever I was a kid growing up, that if you wore glasses, people looked down at you because they was ignorant of people needing to have cheaters. Today, now people wear glasses even though they may not need glasses because it's the cool, hip thing to have, to be a part of. So ideals in cultures, needs and wants changes. We have seen that now for the past 50 or 60 years, especially if you're as old as I am. The younger generation, they haven't had as much experience as what we've had. So we've obviously got more experience to be able to tell more history because of the things that we have witnessed and seen. Whenever you have two parties that has generated this much chaos and this much anarchy, then you have an unproductive system. Like I've said before, the State of the Union itself basically made war with Lincoln towards telling the Confederacy, the South, in how the cow was going to eat the cabbage. And that went on for several years. I think about 6, if I'm not mistaken. Lots of bloodshed. Lots of bloodshed. And it was probably one of the most horrifying events that has ever taken place in America, other than the genocide of the Native American Indians over here. Once more, it was the Europeans with their self-educated ideals saying, well, the Indians are the hostiles and we're the educated people, and because we're the educated people, we are the civilized society. Okay, that was their concept then, going all the way back into the 14th, 15th, 16th century. Look at where we are today. Look at where we are today. Not just pertaining to the parties, but look at where we are today towards the so-called uppity-ups, the professionals, those that's got all this education to be able to operate on people and basically build a nuclear bomb, don't have enough sense to get out of the rain whenever it's raining, or don't have enough sense to change a tire, or don't have enough sense to do the practical things called common sense. These are the people that has led us down this road of where we are today. These are the people that thought that their education was going to be their savior. These are the people, and I'm not saying all of them, but these are the people. I'm just trying to speak categorically here, pertaining to looking at it from a whole perspective. These are the people that basically went into their industry because they felt like it was the proper thing to do, and it was more predominant for them to get into this industry, regardless whether it was a lawyer, counselor, regardless whether it was a politician, a preacher, or any of the above. Basically, the blue collars and the white collars that thought that this was the right choice to make. And maybe it was during that era, in that time frame. But we can also see where basically America has been cheated. Whenever Mr. Putin gets on TV, the Russian government over there, and shakes his finger at the Western world over here and says that we was cheated. It wasn't just the people over in Russia pertaining to the Russian government that was cheated, but we was all cheated, including a great deal of people over here in America that was cheated. Opportunities failed. Factories shut down. It become more of a scrutinizing trajectory in the sense that, hey, it wasn't just that you had to have proper education. Hey, it wasn't just the fact that you was willing to migrate in another area. But now they scrutinize towards, well, do you like this person? Do they look satisfying to you? Well, I was told that they had trouble whenever they was a juvenile. Or I was told that they got in trouble over here for this, or over trouble for that. And now they have basically squeezed and squeezed and squeezed to the point that now they're squeezing themselves. The ecosystem pertaining to the Homo sapiens that basically is part of that ecosystem. The big fish eats the smaller fish. The smaller fish even eats the smaller fish in him, and then that smaller fish eats the smaller fish, and then eventually they get down to the tadpole. Kind of like the ant, whatever. One thing feeds on another thing feeds on another thing. Well, now they're feeding on one another. That's what we're seeing pertaining to the parties. We're seeing them feeding off of one another in trying to make up for inadequacies. And now all of a sudden, all this social media platform has come out to the point that now just about everything that anybody not only says, but basically thinks, can get widespread criticism and reviews. So in other words, if you are a person like me, and there's a lot of us out there like me that don't mind speaking their piece, it narrows your opportunities because of the narrow-minded people out there that are so prejudiced that they are going to discriminate against you because I drive a Ford and you drive a Chevy. Or I had a ticket whenever I was growing up and I got in trouble whenever I was juvenile. Whenever you have a buddy-buddy system like this that's collapsing upon to itself, like I said, they're feeding now on each other to where now you got the big sharks that's feeding on the other big sharks. That's the reason why they're feeding off of Donald Trump the way that they are, because they're inferior to Donald Trump. Our system and the people in the system are inferior of Donald J. Trump. Because Donald J. Trump went in there and stirred up, done just exactly what he said that he was going to do towards draining the swamp. And, it's kind of like law enforcement. Whenever it comes to law enforcement, you have to be practical in understanding that there's two sides to the law. There's the side that they have to do what they have to do to protect the people, and then there's the good side of law enforcement towards basically people just like ordinary people. You go all the way back to the military, back into the way before America ever become America. The two swords that come together, one represented peace, one represented war. One represented the good of mankind, one represented the bad of mankind. Whenever you start taking that out of perspective, especially whenever you start calling good bad and bad good, now you've created anarchy. Total anarchy. Whenever we take our eye off the ball towards the central compass of which way north is versus which way south is, which way the east is versus which way the west is, and we start clamoring, arguing, debating one another, or questioning one another's sanity off of that, then you have calamity. You have anarchy. And that's what these communist-controlled countries are looking at over here pertaining to our democracy. They're looking at calamity. Calamity is basically a form of weakness, especially if it reaches the level like it did during the Civil War, whenever the North was trying to rule the roost, why the South felt like that the biscuit had been pulled out of their mouths, and now all of a sudden they was trying to be the dominant force in ruling the roost. Well, the South gave up. They said, okay, we've had enough of this. You guys, we're going to play it by your rules. You're gonna take charge of this country on a federal level, but our states is still going to be run in independent statehoods, and we're just going to let you guys do what you guys want to do. Well, we've done that now for the past 150 years. Give or take a few years one way or the other. I don't have my math book out right now and itemizing it for sure. But, you know, you're talking about a nation that I think this is our 248th or 249th year. You're talking about a nation that's 250 years old that's basically going through the same type of trajectories as our ancestors was towards starting with a argument, turning into a debate, and if you don't watch, the debate will turn into a war. That's exactly what happened with our Civil American War. Well, now we see that the smart ones, the educated ones, the professional ones, wasn't so smart after all, now was they? In other words, we wouldn't be in the predicament that we're in right now if they would have run the show in a proper, better form. So that tells me that instead of the North defeating the South, in actuality, it was the South that has now showed itself in defeating the North. Now, granted, there was lots of things that the South was doing that I didn't agree with, but there was lots of things that the North was doing that I didn't agree with. And the deal with slavery, I don't care what country, what continent that you're on, slavery is wrong in purposely taking people and using them for your own benefit in some form or way. There's sex slaves. There's all kinds of different slaves. And today that equation still exists in other countries. And in some ways still exists right here in America. Off of your buddy-buddy system. You become enslaved to that rule. You become enslaved to that party. You become enslaved in doing what you're doing. But whenever it gets to the point that you are enslaved more for the party than you are for the people, then you need to stop and evaluate yourself. Why in the world did I ever get involved in the political arena to begin with? It's the same way with the churches. Whenever you are enslaved in a certain particular denomination, and because you are enslaved to that denomination, you refuse to listen to other people's ideals. You refuse to listen to other people's interpretations. You refuse to even consider going somewhere else or doing something else because your grandfather and your grandmother and your great-grandmother and everybody else believed the same way. Then now you have basically narrowed your availability, which in actuality not only narrows your availability, but it narrows your successes and where that you can go and how that you need to get there. We was taught incorrectly here in America by everybody jumping on the bandwagon and saying, oh, you got to have college, you got to have college, go to college, get a degree, that's the way to go. Well, in the meantime, while everybody's jumping on board towards wanting to get these cleaner, better, nicer, safer jobs, the other industries have failed. And to top it off, because of the internet, the world basically shrunk, and all of a sudden you have all these retailers that are saying, I can get this same product shipped to me, put on the shelf for 40 to 50% less than what I can get the company down the road to build it for. So we have brought this upon to ourselves, is my point that I'm trying to make. Because we didn't have enough common sense to figure out that if you substitute one, the other one is going to basically be neglected, and that's going to create failure on down the road. It's time that the people started working for the people. It's time that this partisanship pertaining to politicizing everything. They want to politicize everything. I've been politicized for the past 30 some odd years in putting out a message. I get criticized all the time. Well, Dennis, you shouldn't even be talking about these things going on in the world. You're supposed to be a spiritual leader. You're supposed to strictly stick to John 3:16. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. Well, you know what? If I was a narrow-minded person and that was the only aspect in life that I wanted to go in, I guess John 3:16 would have been sufficient for me. But it's pretty obvious that John 3:16 was not the only thing that I looked at. And there's no doubt John 3:16 is sufficient for any and everybody pertaining to God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. But I got to looking in other matters, in prophecies of historical events that happened in the past, as well as the things that are supposed to be predicted in the future. And because I was so much advanced in those areas, I guess it must have been inferior or intimidating to a lot of these church members around here, the preachers and stuff, and that's the reason why that they didn't want to support the founder of the Windmill Ministries, in addition to, well, he wasn't part of the Baptist, well, he wasn't part of the Church of Christ, well, he wasn't part of the Methodist, and because of it, we're going to ban him. We're going to disfellowship from him and treat him like a red-haired stepchild. And basically allow for him to become an outcast. Okay? Will I become an outcast? There's no question about it. Dennis James Jackson become an outcast because people was either phony or fake pertaining to their belief, or they was intimidated by listening to my messages because they was looking more so at the latter part of Revelation chapter 6 verses 3 and 4 versus the beginning part pertaining to peace and utopia. And we as a society, because of that, have now become victim to that because people did not want somebody like me, and I'm going to use this as a broad perspective, ruling over their lives, and they would rather have somebody with a high amount of education and standing in behind the pulpit, looking elegant, talking elegant, having all these elegant words. That way they could pick and choose, and they could basically butcher up the Bible any way that they wanted to. That way they could kosher to their own consciousnesses, to where at the end of the message, everybody shook one another's hand, patted one another on the back, and said, "I'll see you next Sunday. Wasn't that a good message?" And then go right back to their same old routine. What did Christ say? This ain't got nothing to do with what I've said now in the past 20 minutes. What did Christ say about the blind leading the blind? He said that if the salt pertaining to the gospel had lost its potency, that it would have been just as something to be trodden down by the foot of man. And that is where we are. And I'm so heartbroken that various people around here obviously was either taught incorrectly, or they had so much ego that they was not going to listen to somebody like me because I wasn't part of their little clique. I didn't have a piece of paper. I didn't go to college. I was of this. I was of that. For some reason, everybody in America, including myself, wants to compartmentalize everybody. And by compartmentalizing everybody, you limit the broad perspective of the group, the wholeness of we the people. Now, they talk a good talk on TV pertaining to we the people, but yet no, we don't see no compromising. We don't see no compromising pertaining to people being on either party, basically. They have swelled up, and because they're arrogant or because of their pride, we have reached a stalemate here in America like I don't think has ever happened other than what did happen right before the Civil War. And if that's the trajectory that the American people want to go, I guarantee you it's coming near a neighborhood near you. Continue to stay on the path that you're on, and you will come to that conclusion eventually, to where whenever people are no longer being able to feed themselves, because eventually this ideal towards raising the debt ceiling and not paying Paul, even though you're borrowing from Paul to pay Peter, one day this is going to be a calamity that's going to collapse upon to itself. And if the truth be known, we have already reached a state of survivalness in America that we are no longer self-sustainable. Why is that? Because we're too busy wanting to cut one another's throats and stab one another in the back. Instead of talking about the things that we should be doing for one another, now we're talking about trying to shift the blame off on somebody else because of our failures, our own personal inadequacies. In the meantime, you got competition out there. You got all these other countries now that have stepped on board. Why is that? Because they come over here in their international college degrees, and while they was over here getting their education in our colleges or in our universities, they was taking notes. They was basically open spies. And then whenever they go back home, they share them same ideals with the people that didn't go to college. But they're entrepreneurs, and they don't mind getting a little dirt under their fingernails. They do not mind in making large investments. And basically, the bottom line is, for the past 30 plus years, we have made China who China actually is, as well as other countries that now are becoming stable enough to where they no longer have to have the need or the goodwill coming from the American people, that basically are now shooting their fingers up at us and saying, kiss our tails. That goes back to the teachings of Christ. What did Jesus say? He said, do not throw your pearls before the swine. Because if you do, they'll trample them down and then they'll turn against you. That's what the church world over here in America has done. They have thrown their goodwill and their pearls out before the swine, and now they're being trampled upon. And now, because of this, the only way to straighten this mess out is basically to either roll around in our own inadequacies and our own misery, or roll up our sleeves and get back in the trenches again. You know, whenever it talks there in the first 4 chapters of Revelations, going back to the spirituality of all this, and God's basically speaking to the 7 churches and telling them that he has not found thy works perfect yet. You have to be logical and practical in what he's saying there, because based upon the analogy of Jesus Christ, whenever he was with us walking and talking in the flesh, he told his disciples many times, there's only one good, and that's the Father, pertaining to being perfect. So whenever you look at that word perfect, that's another word that's been miscrutinized to the degree that there's actuality nobody that is perfect, including myself, more so myself. But whenever it says, I have not found thy works perfect yet, he was using that as a summary pertaining to the whole, as the churches not working with one another versus working against one another. And I'm proof of that. For the past 30 plus years, I still, as far as I know, don't have any type of support team or a following. I've never received not one penny that I know of, other than whenever I was on one of my crusades in 1989. There was a group of people up in Washington, D.C. that gave me, I think, about $25 or $30, something like that. But whenever it comes to generous offerings coming to a non-profitable organization pertaining to the Windmill Ministries missions, I haven't received that. A matter of fact, I haven't even received the 10% discount pertaining to being tax exempt, because I attempted to get that done in 1989, and that was a failure. So because of it, every dime that I've spent, every hour that I've spent, every tire that I've replaced because of being on the road and passing out material, regardless whether it was paper material, DVD material, CD material, VHS material, and now it's digital material, has been all on my back. And that's fine, because I'm limited in being a one-man show, a one-man pony show. That's fine. But in the meantime, do not come harping to me about the environment that either your ancestors has created because of them being elderly and being older than you, or yourselves and not participating in wanting to do the proper and right things towards manifesting peace and utopia, which I've said this 1,000 times. The only way to do that is the same way that Billy Graham's son talks about, Franklin Graham, that it's going to require God, 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 and no one else but God, pertaining to him being in leadership of straightening this out. But you have to have willing vessels. You have to have availability vessels to do this. And if you don't have that, then guess what? Your words will be just words. They will not be actions. They will not be actions. And getting on national TV and bickering and fighting and pawing and basically destroying one another, tearing one another apart, is counterproductive towards where these people should be towards working for the people. And if you can't do it in a professional way, the way that you're supposed to do it, well, then there's no other way to do it other than the Donald Trump way, which is basically go in, piss a bunch of people off, get them in fear, intimidated of you, and then start from the ground one and come in and basically create your own, they call it on TV an occult, create your own movement. Like I said, the January 6th deal of them becoming violent pertaining to the hostels, I don't go along with that. But I don't go along with anybody being hostile and violent because of the fact that I am a peacemaker. The Bible says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall obtain the kingdom of God. And the whole time, instead of these people locally around here looking at the founder of the Windmill Ministries towards him being a peacemaker, they've been looking at the founder of the Windmill Ministries towards him being a warmonger. Why is that? Because they was looking at the latter part of Revelation chapter 6 verses 3 and 4 of the red horseman more so than they was the first part of the verse of there has to be peace in order to take peace. It is a oxymoron statement. Bittersweet. Matter of fact, I said something on it with an individual just yesterday on the phone that there's certain parts of the Bible that actually contradict themselves. And he immediately spoke up in defense of the Bible. Oh no, there's nowhere in the Bible that it contradicts itself. You got to be able to put things in the right perspective. It says to study to show thyself approved. And you got to understand that as prophecies are building on one side, there's also other prophecies that's building on the other. And hopefully the both can come into the middle and achieve their objectives. We are living in the last days. Jesus did say that there would be wars and famines and plagues and hardships and commotions. But it also talks about peace. Not just the peace of mind, not just the peace within our hearts towards being able to lay down and sleep good at night, but the peace that is talking about in Revelations is an actual, literal peace. And whenever it talks about the meek inheriting the earth, that enhances that peace. And I ain't just talking about the spiritual meek. I'm talking about the physical meek. I'm talking about we the meek today. But the only way the meek is going to inherit the earth is the meek is going to have to start cooperating with one another and start working for one another and with one another rather than tearing one another apart. Because if that's all we can talk about is wanting to tear one another apart and stab one another in the back and cut one another's throat, Satan is basically achieving his objective, which is what? The Bible says that he's out to kill, steal, and destroy. He is our adversary. The Bible also says that he's the author of confusion. The more that he can keep people fighting against one another, the more that he can keep us choking one another to death, the more that he can keep us stabbing one another in the back and basically tearing one another apart, the more that he's jumping up and down and rejoicing, saying, I got him, I got him, I got him. And then this same individual said, Brother Dennis, this is the Lord's war. And we're supposed to hand it over to the Lord for the Lord to fight our battles for us. And my response to that was, metaphorically speaking, you're correct. Theoretically speaking, you're correct. It is the Lord's war. But whenever we make a choice to be on the Lord's side, the Lord did not call us into this arena in the process of a playground, but a battleground. This is our war. This is our battle. We have stood up for Christ. And because of it, this becomes our war, our battle, the battle of righteousness, the battle of being able to teach others as disciples. And then once they get taught enough, then the discipleship changes from being a disciple to an apostle, because now you're no longer a pupil, but now you're a teacher. Study to show thyself approved. Once you become approved, then you go out and approve other people to become approved. And it's kind of like the pyramid calamity, where you start out with one particular person, which is the Lord Jesus Christ. For he said to Peter, upon this rock I will build my church. First of all, it wasn't a literal rock. It was not a literal rock that he was talking about. And he wasn't talking about building a church off of the goodwill of Peter or any other disciple. He was talking about himself being the rock, being the cornerstone. And whenever our eyes and ears and our emotions can no longer stay focused upon why we are engaged in spirituality affairs, then we're no longer being properly minded, properly endeavored towards doing what God intends for us to do to begin with. We're being blinded. And if the blind lead the blind, they shall both leadeth off into the ditch. That's where we are, America. We're in a ditch. We are in a ditch. And the only way of opening up people's eyes and people's hearts is that you're going to have to get back down in the grassy row, and you're going to have to pull up your sleeves, and I'm sorry, you're going to have to get some dirt under your fingernails. And if you're not willing to do that as a subservient unto the Lord, towards no longer being discipled, but now you actually becoming a messenger yourself, then if you're not willing to do that as an apostle, then odds are you probably ain't got the right deal to begin with. You're probably just deceiving and blinding yourself to begin with, pretending your emotions or other people's feelings are in it for the wrong causes to begin with. I can't answer that. Only you can answer that. Only I can answer that. Every day that I wake up is another day that I had to reach the level of perfection, of believing that I'm going to try to make today better than yesterday. Yesterday was my same opinion about that day in making yesterday's day better than the day before that day. It's called maturity. It's called growth. It's called expanding. And if you're not part of the solution to the problem, odds are you are the problem. So whenever you look at the parties of the way that they've been choking and cheating and backbiting, and all these politicians that goes in to their offices making all these promises that it's for the people, it's for the people, it's for us, we the people. And then once they get in there, you realize, my God, their pocketbooks are getting fuller, while ours is either remaining the same or getting broker. In other words, their streets around their house are probably paved and looks awful nice, while everybody else's is being neglected. In other words, we still have the same pothole that we got to steer around just to be able to get to the supermarket. Or the same bridge, it looks like it's about to collapse and fall in. The things that I'm talking about is not the popular most things that people want to hear. But you must understand, in order for maturity, sometimes it requires people like me to stand on some people's toes and say, you know what? If you continue to do what you're doing, expecting different results, that is a form of retardation, insanity. And if you don't believe me, go to some of these AA meetings or drug AA meetings or whatever, and that's basically what they teach you. I've been to a few of them, not because I had to go, but because I wanted to go. I wanted to hear what they was talking about, the higher power and etc. And they got this little thing that they usually hold hands and they pull together, and they do this little memento on every meeting of a higher power and this and that, in which all that stuff's fine. All that stuff's fine, but once more, if you're trying to clean the cup from the outside in versus the inside out, what did Jesus say about that? See, that was one of the main concepts of Jesus chastising the Philistines, because they was more worried about the outer appearances than they was the inner appearances. Matter of fact, they would criticize Jesus because Jesus didn't wash his hands before he got ready to eat. They seen washing hands as it being part of cleanliness, pertaining to being righteous. And it wasn't what that they was looking at, but how that they was looking at it. And they was looking at it incorrectly. It's just like looking at a glass of water. Is it half full or half empty? Am I going to have the frame of reference within myself of saying, we can do it, we can do it? Or am I going to have the frame of reference towards I'm defeated and we'll never be able to do it? We'll never be able to do it. I will say this about Joe Biden. He has maintained a positive perspective, usually on a lot of different issues that he talks about, towards being a good motivator, ordinarily, even though he don't practice what he preaches, especially whenever it comes to the different problems that we're engaged in right now. And it's not just the southern border. My God, it's 1,000 other different things that's probably just as bad, if not worse. But once more, if somebody like me, every time you hear about the Windmill Ministries missions and you want to flip the channel and turn me off, you keep in mind that every time you turn me off, there's consequences. There's consequences. That's like turning your law book off, whatever continent that you're living on, and saying, well, you know what, I'm not going to listen to those laws. I'm just going to do my own thing. Well, you know what usually happens? There's consequences. You don't abide by the law book pertaining to being on the road, and you want to get out here and drive like a maniac, there's consequences. There's consequences. Consequences goes along with marriages. Consequences goes along with relationships. Consequences goes along with being a good employer versus a good employee. The Bible says to do all things as in doing them unto the Lord. All things. And this is the area that I try to perfect every day. And I know that I make a idiot out of myself a lot of times. I make a failure out of myself a lot of times by falling into sometimes the same old desirable temptation because of me fighting the flesh. But I always look for more strength. I look for God to pardon me, and I start again and again and again. Why is that? Because I'm trying to reach that perfected state, not for my glory, but for His. And whenever it talks about that I've not found thy works perfect yet, pertaining to the 7 churches in the first part of Revelations, he's talking about that God has not found, by and large, our perspective of perfectness pertaining to the churches building one another up versus tearing one another apart. And it's the same way with a democracy. It's the same way with the laws. It's the same way with the laws of nature. It's the same way with relationships. It's the same way with working. It's the same way with everything. There's always consequences. Always. Whenever you start violating those principles.
Is that she is politically talented. Her biggest problem, she's actually got what I would say is 3 major problems.
Let's go forward here. I don't think I want to hear this. Let's go. See what they're talking about here. This is basically the first week. Hold on, I do want to go here.
Only thing.
Right here, back up. This is basically day 7. I think they're on gun violence here. Looks to be, yep. We are. We're talking about gun violence here. Go on. Go backwards. Right. Yeah. All right. There you go. Keep going. Keep going. This is an area that I sure want to touch base on, because this is the whole primary reason that I was moved, my brother and I, towards wanting to achieve what we was going to achieve out here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, pertaining to the memorial site out here, of all the basically senseless violence, all the hostels. I call them the hostels. That's what the Native Americans was accused of back when the Europeans wanted to come over here. They was called the hostels. They was full of hostility. But the Europeans wasn't looking at their hostility. They was only looking at the Native Americans' hostility. Talk about being blindsided.
SNBC.
On Friday evening, Wayne LaPierre, the man who has led the NRA for decades, resigned. The announcement was made amid a whole host of legal troubles, largely of LaPierre's own making, and just as his civil trial in New York was getting underway. Now, to understand all this, it's important to go back to the summer of 2020. New York Attorney General Letitia James sued LaPierre and 3 other leaders at the NRA, alleging that they violated nonprofit laws and misused millions of dollars in NRA funds for their own lavish lifestyles. And some of these details are pretty blatant. I mean, according to the lawsuit, the NRA spent over $500,000 on private flights for LaPierre, including 8 family trips to the Bahamas. He had the NRA pay his personal travel consultant more than $100,000 annually for what? Who knows? And he expensed over $100,000 in membership fees for a golf club. The New York AG's lawsuit originally sought to oust LaPierre from leadership, and that's clearly not an issue anymore. But the jurors in this trial will determine if he's liable and how much LaPierre and his associates will have to repay the NRA. Now, while that may temporarily add a bit to the dwindling NRA bank accounts, this is all kind of just the latest in what has been a stream of scandals that have contributed to the steady hollowing out of what was once one of the most influential and feared lobbying bodies in the country. These scandals have taken an acute toll on the NRA, there's no question. If you look back to 2016, the NRA's revenue since then has dropped by 44%. Membership has plummeted to 4.2 million after being 6 million just 5 years ago. And while the NRA filed for bankruptcy in Texas in an attempt to duck the New York lawsuit, insiders tell the New York Times the organization may actually be reaching a point where a legitimate bankruptcy filing is necessary. And although the power of the NRA and Wayne LaPierre are evaporating, it's so important to remember the immeasurable hold that their legacy still has on American life. First, remember the way that the Second Amendment is talked about today was not at all the way it was understood for decades. I mean, the NRA didn't begin as a lobbying arm for gun ownership. It was a marksmanship club founded by Union veterans after the Civil War. But in the century that followed, it transformed into a concerted and well-funded effort to recast how the Second Amendment was understood. Just take a listen to a Republican nominated Chief Justice of the Supreme Court talk about the Second Amendment back in 1991.
This has been the subject of one of the greatest pieces of fraud, I repeat the word fraud, on the American public by special interest groups that I have ever seen in my lifetime. A well-regulated militia. If the militia, which was going to be the state army, was going to be well-regulated, why shouldn't 16 and 17 and 18 or any other age persons be regulated in the use of arms, the way an automobile is regulated?
To use Justice Warren Berger's language, the NRA, with the help of Wayne LaPierre, solidified that fraud 8 years later in the direct aftermath of what at the time was the worst school shooting in American history, Columbine. Following that horrific shooting, where 2 students shot and killed 13 of their classmates and injured 20 other people, Wayne LaPierre and other NRA leaders hopped on a crisis call to decide how the organization would handle the situation. And according to the tapes released by NPR in 2021, the NRA was in a panic. They considered canceling their convention that would be held just days later a few miles away from Columbine in Denver. They even pitched the idea of starting $1 million victims fund. But ultimately, this is the key piece,
The strategy they landed on is the one we have seen from the NRA and its allies ever since: defiance. Despite the urging of the victims' families to cancel the convention, the NRA pressed on despite protests, and NRA President Charlton Heston delivered these words decrying any regulation on gun ownership.
We must not let tragedy lay waste to the most rare and hard-won human right in history. We will not relinquish it, or be silenced about it, or be told, "Do not come here, you are unwelcome in your own land."
The strategy became to double down, to never give an inch. And in tragedy after horrible tragedy that followed the Columbine shooting, the NRA and its acolytes never wavered from that mission. Even 13 years after Columbine, at Sandy Hook Elementary School, where 20 first graders and 6 teachers and staff were gunned down, the problem could still never be about the guns.
The only way to stop a monster from killing our kids is to be personally involved and invested in a plan of absolute protection. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
More guns. The answer for the NRA and its right-wing allies was more guns, after 20 first-grade children were murdered in their classroom. In the over decade since, with each mass shooting that has become just commonplace in American life, that's still the answers they give. Just listen to the Republican reaction to yet another school shooting that happened earlier this week at a high school in Iowa.
I don't support infringing the rights of law-abiding citizens with respect to the ability to exercise their constitutional rights. I know these things can be used to try to target things, and a lot of the things that are proposed would not have even prevented any of these things.
We could go and take away a certain kind of gun today, and that would make you feel better today. But a week from now, there'd be another shooting.
It's just horrible. So surprising to see it here. But have to get over it. We have to move forward.
Get over it. Those responses you just heard are all courtesy of decades of work by Wayne LaPierre and his once personal slush fund, the NRA. While he's on the way out, and the organization he helped build is a shell of what it once was, the damage of their legacy lives on in America. Coming up, an exciting announcement about who will be joining me on tomorrow night's show, so stay with us.
I want to leave it right there, pertaining to what was said and how it was said about the gun violence here in America. Like I said, this is a very, very touching topic with me, to the extent that my brother and I was wanting to honor the victims of all those who have been innocently slain. Not only that, but also in honoring our United States military towards hopefully being able to build
the NRA and
some
its
sort
acolytes
of an alliance in teaching the community about veterans and about people that goes through dramatic, stressful situations like that, to be able to deal with people with post-traumatic stress disorders. And of course, post-traumatic stress disorders can come in multiple different ways, but the way that we had our hearts set on was pertaining to the first responders in the military, pertaining to building a memorial site out here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. They didn't want me to do this. I had a lot of resistance in this area, to the degree that it basically costed me my younger sibling's life, David Jeffrey Jackson, because of all the aggravation and all the torment that they was bringing into our lives, because they did not want me to come back here to be able to finish up what that I had started planting seeds 30 plus years ago. They had already fumigated resistances using marketing skills through the computer of what that they was going to do and how that they was going to do it. Why is that? Because they did not want to put Dennis James Jackson in a limelight of good. And this limelight of bad did not just begin yesterday in my life. It didn't just begin in 2014 whenever I come back to Northwest Tennessee, but it basically began in 1983 after my life was spared, and the devil knew that my life was spared, and the devil demons working through these individuals know that my life was spared, and that they did not want Dennis James Jackson to fulfill his purpose. So there has been a pattern beginning in Kenton, Tennessee in 1983. Let's mark him, let's brand him, let's put him on the block towards being a lunatic. After 9/11 happened, then they changed their strategy. Well, that strategy ain't working. He's still out there. He's still putting out his ideology. He's still putting out his message. So let's change our strategies. And a lot of time, listen to me, whenever people does these things, they don't do these things consciously. They do these things subconsciously to the point that they don't know why they hate me. They just hate me. Well, I know why they hate me. Jesus explained why the non-Christians hate the Christians. Because you're on the wrong side. That's why they hate you. That's why they want to eliminate you. That's why they want to destroy you. And at the expense of destroying themselves, they are willing to bring destruction into everybody's life. Now that's the motivation coming from the dark one, from the evil one, the Luciferian Lucifer. He knows that his decision that he made was a decision of destruction. And because he made that decision for himself, and a third of the angels followed with him, and God only knows how many more millions of people that's followed his footsteps, that's what his objectives is to try to get everybody else to fail like he failed. That's what he wants. He's out to kill, steal, and destroy. And if the American people, especially the American, well, not just the American, but the Christian people all over the earth, if they can't see this for themselves and understand this, that we not fight against flesh and blood, but against principalities, if they can't understand these things, then odds are they're probably part of the problem versus part of the solution to it. And I hate to be so abrupt about this, I really do. But whenever you see these senseless, hostile acts again and again and again, and I'm sure this year we're going to see some more of them. It's just a matter of time before the red, white, and blue flag will fall halfway to the pole in honor of the victims. When is it going to stop? Well, some will tell you, well, there'll never be peace until the Lord returns. Okay, well, that's how you feel about it. That's how you see it. Then odds are, in your mind, if we was to follow after your thoughts and your perspectives, we would probably all be doomed. But that ain't my thoughts. That's not my perspectives. And it never has been for the past 30 years, ever since I've stepped out, 30 plus years, ever since I've stood out into the eyes of the people, representing peace, utopia, love, mercy, God Almighty through the teachings of Christ. But still in the year 2024, not seeing a movement. Not seeing a positive movement that's a reflection from the Windmill Ministries at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. So the only other alternative thing that I'm supposed to think of, well, they're still objectionable to me and my message, and because of it, they're doomed. We're dealing with a society that is just as doomed today as what the society was dealing with whenever God spoke to Noah and said, build a boat. Build a boat, because these people are soon to come to their ruin. And rather than it being a slow ruin, a slow process of especially damaging the innocent, and basically everybody become infested with this disease that Satan brought upon to society during that time, God had compassion on them, basically as a mercy killing. That's why God destroyed the old world. That's why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, he'll do the same to us if we reach that pivotal point to where they're at the point of no return. You can't help them. The only thing we can do now at this point in time is do like we've done to all the other cultures and come back in flaming fire, taking vengeance upon them that know not God, and go ahead and gather what few people that they are left down here and turn this thing into a Roman candle. And you know what? At the rate that we're going right now and what the oil industry, OPEC typhoons are doing to this planet, we won't have to wait for God to destroy us. We're going to destroy ourselves. We're going to destroy ourselves out of greed and basically stupidity. Whenever it comes to all the gun violence, whenever it comes to all the environmental changes that the world is seeing on a day-to-day, everyday level. Last year was the hottest year on record. I just got through reading a while ago pertaining to 1.5 Celsius degrees that they plan on us probably hitting by the year 2025. They claim that if we hit that point, that will be a pivoting point of basically us going over the Rubicon of the point of no return. So I cannot emphasize and put enough urgency on the message of not only gun violence, but also the environmental problems that we're creating for ourselves. Because the Bible is very clear in how that God is going to deal with us mortals down here on the planet, that he will come back and destroy those who are destroying the planet. He will come back and destroy those who are destroying the planet. That's not if, that's not could be, that's not it's not a metaphor. That is a literal statement coming from the Bible. That there will be consequences. And if you don't believe me, hang around coming near a neighborhood near you. And if it's not something big pertaining to a major mass shooting, it can be on an individual level. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the way that I read it a while ago, there was over 600 and something mass shootings that averaged 2 a day. And you got to have at least 4 or more people that got shot to consider it a mass shooting. 2 a day in America. We exceed all the other countries, including the patterns over in some of the most dangerous remote areas in the world. We exceed those facts. So you can't tell me that we're not a sick people. For Jesus said that he cometh not for those that needeth not a physician, but for those that do need a physician. My friends, if there's ever been a time that we needed a physician, if there's ever been a time that we needed good, strong, sound leadership, if there's ever been a time that we needed to bond together in counsel, in the Holy Spirit pertaining to a revolutionary revival, it is today. And if we don't do it, expect more of the same thing. Good luck to each and every one of us. And I say that remorsefully. And I say that very, very sincerely to we the people, not only in America, but the people all over the world. Good luck to all of us. Because we have basically been led down this road of doom and gloom. And if we don't watch, our doom and gloom is only going to become more broader, wider, and deeper. Till eventually there will be a calamity that will exceed all the other calamities, because you keep in mind we're no longer dealing with conventional warfare today as far as just regular bullets or missiles, but now we're dealing with nuclear armament. So don't say that it can't happen or that it won't happen, because if it reaches an accelerated point to the point that of no return, not only environmentally, but also morally, also politically, also culturally. If it reaches the point of no return, don't say that it cannot happen coming near a neighborhood near you. So the only thing that I can tell those that do care enough about wanting to listen to anything that I got to say is pray and keep praying and put your message out there, that there is a message of hope, that there is a message of peace and utopia, but we, the people, have to abide by the regulations of getting there. And if we don't, there's going to be strong consequences that we have seen fall upon the other generations and other cultures. And one of those cultures right now that have been going through hell and are still going through hell is the Holy Land over in the Middle East. That, as far as I'm concerned, teetotal hell could bust loose before I get through making this message. Teetotal hell. And I'm talking about mushroom bombs. I'm talking about turning that whole region basically into a sandbox. So if you think that you're seeing misery on a humanitarian scale that the world hadn't seen now in the past 75, 80 years, don't think that it can't get no worse, because it can. Don't think that it can't get no worse, because it can. And odds are it will, unless we see a divine movement of intercession with the Almighty. Not only environmentally, politically, emotionally, psychologically, culturally. We are on a trajectory of doom and gloom. We're on a trajectory of seeing the world cast off in the Great Tribulation. God bless. Good luck to all of us. In the year 2024, this is the 7th day of January, basically a week into this year. I'm going to have to lay low pertaining to my social media outlook in the next few weeks, in the next month or so. So I won't be near as active with my social media as I usually am. I'm going through some excruciating things myself that I need people's prayers on. I need people to remember me in your prayers. And please remember one another. Pray for the elderly. Pray for the sick. Pray for the defenseless. Pray for people over in Jerusalem, Israel. Pray for cultures all over the world. Pray for the people over in Russia. Pray for the people over in the Ukraine area. Pray that the world will pay attention to what the world is doing to itself towards basically digging their own graves. That's where we're at. We're digging our own graves. And theoretically speaking, the things that the NRA teaches pertaining to a good person versus a bad person with a gun, I go along with on a violent level. On that particular perspective, I go along with. The only way to defeat a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun. But why does it have to get on that level? Why do we have to reach the level of warmongering against one another whenever there is a much, much, much better path? A path of peace, utopia, and a path of prosperity in helping one another versus destroying one another. God bless America, God bless our troops, and God bless where we go in the future from this moment on.